Hi guys, welcome to part 8 of the design patterns video tutorial series. So this will be most likely the last video in this series. In the last video we completed implementing the application. In this video we will review the design through our UML diagram, and we will try to see how extensible our design is and what other considerations we need to take if this was an actual real-world project. So let's start reviewing the design. So as you remember, these two packages were already there, the backend simulator and the logger. So the backend simulator shot out events and threw it to the logger, and then what our logger did is call into our events collector. So we will focus on our event collector package. The first thing we did is we created the event class and the subclasses for all the different event types. So this is like our basic model for the events, and then we created a event factory that can create events so that the string would be able to convert to a log. So this here we use the factory pattern where we have an interface for create event that based on an input gives out an event. And then we implemented a backend logs factory that would convert the input from the logger to an event object. And then we created the entry point for our event collector. So the logger simply calls into this events collector, and this events collector then uses the factory to create an event. And then after creating the event, it shoots it to our publisher. So the event collector configuration contains all the configurations, all the observers that we want to turn on, all the visitors, all the statistic collectors. So we can control everything through this class. So next, let's take a look at the events collector, which throws the events to the event publisher. So here we are using the observer design pattern, where the publisher has many instances of our observer. And then we created 3 observers. One was for JSON, one was for console logging, and one was for statistics generation. And since this is an event observer, it only receives the superclass event or the superclass event, but we want to be able to handle each class separately, differently. So that's why we have visitors. So we have an event visitor that has the ability to visit everything. So here you can see we have combined observer and visitor patterns. And then 2, rely on the string generation visitor. And then through the strategy pattern, we decide the strategy of generating a string, because both of these JSON and console logging are doing something with a string, right? So there's only one visitor for the string generation, and it generates a string based on the strategy. So we have a JSON generation strategy and a console log string generation strategy. So here we have the strategy design pattern. And then for our statistics, we have a statistics visitor. And then we have only one kind of statistics visitor right now, which is the event count statistics visitor. And then if ever we need to add more visitors, we would just subclass this and add them to the observer. So the statistics generation observer has a list of visitors that collect statistics. So if we want to add new ways of collecting statistics, we would simply register it here in our configuration to this particular observer. So that's basically it. Again, to summarize, we have factory here, we have observer design pattern here, and then we have visitor design pattern here, which the observer makes use of, and we have a strategy design pattern here, which the string generation visitor makes use of. And of course, we have a singleton, which is this one, because factories are better off being singletons. Now that we've understood the design, let's try to test the design by seeing how extensible is it, because this is our main goal, for it to be easily extensible, easily maintainable. So we will look into these factors. How can we add a new event type? How can we add a new statistics collector? Because as you remember from the requirements, it was mentioned that there could be new ways of collecting statistics later on. So we must consider this. And then how easy is it to add a new event observer? What if I have a new module or new things that we want to do with the events? Is it easy to do? And then how easy is it to turn on or off a certain event processor? So for example, if we don't want this processor, or if we want to turn it off for a certain client, is it easy to do so? So let's start. How can we add a new event type? So we just create a new class for the event type. We will subclass the event type interface, and then we add a case in the factory to be able to convert that logs for this event type to that corresponding event type. And then we have to add a method in each visitor for that event type. So for the visit, remember the visit method was for each concrete class. So if we add a new concrete event type, then we will have to add a method in the visitor also. This is one of the downsides of the visitor pattern, because you have to go into each concrete visitor that you have and add it. But then again, we have to put in the logic somewhere of handling that new event type. It's just that if we use the visitor pattern, it's going to be scattered across every file. If we have the typical polymorphic way, everything related to that event will be in one file. But then there's a disadvantage of clogging that file with many responsibilities. So you just kind of have to decide which, there are always trade-offs. So for our application, probably the visitor solution was better. But considering that event types won't be added so often, it's not something so volatile. So overall, we can say it's a good solution to use the visitor. And it's not that bad. Right now, we only have around 2 or 3 visitors. So it should be pretty straightforward to be able to add a new event type. And then how can we add a new statistics collector? So we create a new subclass to the statistics event visitor, and then create an instance of this class in the configuration file. So if you can just take a look at this method in the code and see that we can register it to our statistics generation observer and start up a timer task if needed. And then how can we add a new event observer? So we just create a subclass to event observer, and we instantiate and register it in the configuration file. So it's pretty straightforward to add a new event observer. If we have a new module that needs to listen to events, it's straightforward. And then how easy is it to turn on or off a certain event processor? So we can simply comment it out in the configuration file. So everything related to configuration, like where we save our JSON events, or which event listeners or observers do we want to be on, we can control everything in this configuration class. So that's a nice thing about our design. And further considerations, as I mentioned, this is a real world application of design patterns, but the project that we saw here is far from production code. There are still many considerations in the real world that is out of the scope of this video series. Like, one example is we still have to deal with multi-threading issues. Remember that we register observers to our event publisher, and each time there is an event, it loops through each observer and notifies them. Now, while notifying an observer, if that particular observer throws an exception, it will just break out of the loop, and no one else or the remaining observers won't get the notification. Worse, the application will crash. And then furthermore, if one observer takes a lot of time, we're just having one thread, so it's going to be stuck there forever, trying to wait for that observer to finish handling that event and then move on to the remaining event observers. So it would be nice to make a design that would be more multi-threaded, so it will call each observer on a new thread, and then we also have to handle our threading issues, like in case one throws an exception, one crashes. So again, this is out of the scope of this video. We were focusing on how to apply design patterns in the real world application. So that's all for this video series. It was very fun and interesting, and I hope this video series was helpful for you in being able to learn how to apply design patterns in the real world.